Mr. Mamdani, whatever you think of him, and that's a separate conversation, is proposing something that reminds me mostly of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He's not gone beyond that. He's proposing the kind of liberal, social democratic, if you want, proposals that Franklin Delano Roosevelt proposed. And by the way, when Roosevelt proposed it, it was attacked with the same language in the same way by the same people or their grandpa as are doing the same thing now. It's as if the last few years haven't succeeded. But I want to remind people that here's some lessons of history that the mass media avoid. Mr. Mamdani is not the first socialist to be a mayor of American City. I did a little research. In 1911, I picked that year because 73 American cities in that year had socialist mayors. And as Brian points out, many of them were elected on the Socialist Party line, not as a Democrat, not as a Republican. I've looked at two of them. Bridgeport, Connecticut, an industrial city, had a famous socialist mayor. Milwaukee, Wisconsin, another well-known example, had a socialist mayor, actually had more than one of them. So the notion that a socialist mayor is some kind of disaster you have to avoid is pure BS and is propaganda of the crudest sort. Number one. Number two, there are places in the world today that have free transit. That's not a new idea. Let me also remind people that in many of the countries in Europe that Americans think of as allies, Western Europe, socialists are very prominent in the government. We are the weird country that has excluded them for the last 75 years in the post-war, Cold War hysteria that is still with us. The head of the country of Spain, as I'm speaking, Mr. Sanchez, he's a socialist. The party that runs Spain is a socialist party. I might mention that Spain is outstanding right now in Europe as the one country that welcomes immigrants, doesn't deport them, has no ICE going and hunting them down. I just read this morning that in Los Angeles, they're talking about Anne Frank stories. All the people hiding their children in a hidden chamber of the attic, lest the ICE. You know what that's a reminiscent of? Well, you do. So I won't have to go into it. Spain doesn't do that. The largest block of deputies in the French National Assembly, that's the equivalent of our Congress, is socialist. Socialist Party, an alliance. Socialists, communists, and others, all of whom identify as socialists. So the notion that you can't have a socialist elected official makes the United States weird and different, not in advance, but behind even its own history. There's nothing all that radical. What's different about Mr. Mamdani is that the things he proposes are good for the average citizen. That's new. The city isn't going to be run, if he wins in November, by somebody whose first loyalty is the big bank and Wall Street and real estate. It's actually the other side, where the majority of people are, democratic with a little d as opposed to the big one. It's amazing to watch, you're quite right, the spectacle of nonsense that spews out by people who thought that they had conquered socialism. You never did. I'm reminded of the famous line of Mark Twain to the editor of that newspaper in Hartford, Connecticut, when he picked it up one day at breakfast and read the obituary of Mark Twain. He wrote the line, "Dear editor, reports of my demise have been greatly exaggerated." Well, you can say the same thing about socialism, and Mr. Mamdani just proved it. He didn't just win the primary. He won it overwhelmingly, defeating a former governor who's like a mascot for the decrepit Democratic Party leadership.
Richard, as we get towards the end here, I want to keep with this theme a little bit with Mamdani's mayoral win, not the mayoral win, but the win in the primary. He's in the DSA. He's asked on the media, "Are you a communist?" He says no. I mean, his parents, at least I think his father, and perhaps his mother too, are Marxists. But he says, no, I'm not a communist. I'm a social democrat. Now, as you know, socialism has many different trends, tendencies, factions, parties, organizations. Naturally, it's a big sort of tent in the sense that socialism, at the time of the emergence of a modern working class, an urban working class, socialism became a predominant doctrine, a predominant philosophy for how change would happen. And there were reformist socialists and revolutionary socialists. And even the revolutionary socialists were for reforms, but they said reforms are not enough. We need a new system. Now, Mamdani says, I'm a social democrat. Now, if he was elected, Richard, New York, and as a socialist, as a social democrat, New York City would not be a communist city. But even if he was a communist, if he was elected to be mayor, New York City would not be a communist city. It would still have Wall Street. It would still have income inequality. It would be a class-driven New York City. The reason I'm mentioning this is the Communist Party of Italy, which was a mass communist party, and they said they were communists, not social democrats, even though it was kind of muddled at points, to say the least. Yeah. In the mid-'70s, they became the governance in Rome and in some other Italian cities. And people loved the way the Communist Party governed Rome compared to the capitalist parties. In the state of Kerala in India, the Communist Party India Marxist, another mass communist party like the Italian Communist Party, they were the governance, in charge of the administration of the state of Kerala for a long time. And many, many people considered Kerala to be the best run state in India. No. Now, in the United States, so in other words, you could have communists take over the governance of a city or a state, and it doesn't necessarily change the class character of the country. But in the United States, and I think this is what I'm getting to, is the ideological factor is so dominant that in the United States, even if someone who's not part of a socialist party, not part of a Marxist party, running as a Democrat, but says that they are a social democrat, becomes mayor, it creates this avalanche of hysteria. And I wondered, outside of the sort of ideological / religious element to this sort of underpinning of the American capitalist ruling class's outlook, what's the material basis? What are they afraid of? I mean, why would the capitalists in New York City who have so much wealth be so worried that a mayor might become, a socialist might become a mayor for 4 years or even 8 years? What's the underlying fear? What's the material basis for this ideological weirdness?
Well, it's a great, great question, Brian, and I love the opportunity to answer. What's behind that is the same fear of having the government do almost anything. Look at the knee-jerk reaction. We shouldn't have a post office. We should all be relying on FedEx or UPS. We should privatize the government should do nothing. What is the fear behind this? The government does stuff. The government runs the military. We're not proposing to have a private navy. We have a government navy, and we're all supposed to salute, literally, to this government operation. So what is this crazy notion about? And the answer is simple. It really is. Democracy is an idea that Americans at least give lip service to, that they take it seriously, that they believe somehow in the basic idea that if you are affected by a decision, then you therefore have the right to participate in making that decision. So we vote for the mayor of our town because we know that mayors have the powers to do all kinds of things that affect our lives, from garbage pickup to how the schools run and to all kinds of other things. So the mayor has power, so we have to participate, ergo, we have an election. It's a small step, but it is a way for those affected by the decision to have some input. And if you're really upset that the mayor is doing what you don't want, you can vote against him or her in the next election. Here's what the problem of the American capitalist class is. Capitalist business doesn't run that way. When you cross the threshold into your workplace, your office, your store, your factory, you're walking into a place from which democracy is excluded. It's banned. A tiny group of people, the board of directors, if you work for a corporation, they make all the key decisions. What to produce, what technology to use, where to carry out the production, and what to do with the results, the output. You are affected by what technology you have to use. You are affected by what the product is and how it impacts society. You are affected by having the job, by what hours you have to keep, by what skills you have to offer. You're affected in many ways. Do you vote over who runs you? Answer, no. And you know, people have been upset about that, whether they're conscious of it or not, ever since capitalism began. It is an Achilles heel of capitalism. It always was. We, the people, struggled for universal suffrage, that we all get to vote. U.S. Constitution, when it was first written, excluded most people. Excluded women, excluded non-whites, excluded people who had no property. We struggled to get all those people over the centuries into the voting. So we got the people. Capitalism doesn't have the people. It runs a system that is against democracy, and it knows that the people's desire to overcome that exclusion, to have a system that is not only democratic where you live, but democratic where you work, because that's where you spend 5 out of 7 days of your life, the best hours of that day. That's the problem. They don't want any examples of the people together making the government work for them. That's an alternative model they want to pretend doesn't exist. And the joke is, in every other capitalist country, even Britain, there's more of that than there is in this country because we are so ideologically afraid. So other countries have much more of what we call socialism, which, by the way, frightens nobody in England, Germany, France, Italy, Scandinavia, or anywhere else. They've had many socialist leaders, no disasters to speak of. They're much more in danger by fascism than they ever were by socialism.